Welcome back to a very special edition of Patrick Christie's Tonight. I am joined by a stellar political panel. We've got former Tory MP Miriam Case, we've got Labour MP Barry Gardiner, Reform's Matt Goodwin and human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. But before that, GB News can exclusively reveal now, that more than 75% of UK adults want a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Last night, not a single Labour MP voted in favour of a Tory amendment that would have forced a national inquiry. The YouGov poll, commissioned by the Women's Policy Centre, reveals that a staggering 76% of Brits backed calls for a national inquiry into the sexual abuse and rape of children by grooming gangs. And 77% support measures to revoke British nationality and deport those with dual nationality found guilty of grooming and raping young girls. And for reaction to that exclusive polling, I'm joined now by GB News' national reporter Charlie Peters, who is in Rotherham for us tonight. And Charlie, you have been talking to victims and survivors in Rotherham, and I imagine that the results of that poll chime in with what you've heard from them.
That's right, Patrick, and it's survivors all around the country who I've been speaking to this week who say they are demanding that public inquiry. Some survivors, particularly in Oldham, have not backed the call on a national level, but instead want a government-led inquiry specifically into Oldham. But generally speaking, Patrick, as you've seen in that poll, there is a widespread demand for that call for a national inquiry among the public. But it's the second stat you refer to, that demand for deportation as well, that I think is very key. 76% backing calls for the deporting of those who have a dual nationality but are convicted of child abuse and are members of grooming gangs. Now, Patrick, when I saw that poll shared exclusively with GB News earlier this evening, I went through my archive, gathered over several years of these sorts of cases, and I looked through the legal data I've got. Patrick, as far as I can tell, I know of more people who have fled Britain because they are facing investigation or are set to be investigated over grooming abuses than I know of men who have been deported after a conviction for grooming gang offences. More people are fleeing this country, according to my research, looking into this for years, than they are being deported over grooming gang abuse. It's really quite astonishing. And you were drawing the attention of our viewers towards the case of Keir in Rochdale, now working as a delivery driver 10 years after he was convicted of being a ringleader of an abuse gang in Rochdale. A gang so abusive, I would refer to it as being a torture gang, what those girls endured in that Greater Manchester town. He ran a house which was essentially a paedophile honesty box, where men could sign their names at a piece of paper on the front of the door and then pay whatever they owed for access to those young white girls at the end of the month. He's still in Britain, Patrick. He is still in Britain. Now, under the Nationality and Borders Act of 2022, the United Kingdom can apply visa penalties to countries that refuse to accept grooming gang deporters. Last year, the former Safeguarding Minister Laura Farris said that she would look into that, but as far as I can tell, it's never been done.
Charlie, thank you very much, as ever, and we'll chat to you again very soon. Charlie Peters, therefore, who's in Rotherham. Miriam, your reaction to the results of that poll, then, former Tory MP, that apparently 76% of the country wanted an inquiry, 77% wanted people deported if they had committed a crime.
Well, I don't think they're surprising. I mean, this issue has obviously had wall-to-wall coverage over the last week and a bit. And not only have we found out lots more about the perpetrators, but also about the hideousness of the crimes that they committed, which I don't think was widely known about before. But I do have I absolutely agree that we should deport people who aren't British nationals. I mean, that goes without saying. I do think we should be careful about a public inquiry. Yes, of course, we need justice. There are many more people who should be in prison, many more people who should have lost their jobs. But we don't have a great record on national inquiries in this country actually achieving anything. And even the last inquiry that didn't fully cover some of those recommendations, I think, are pointless unless we have total culture change in this country about what it means for safeguarding. Okay. So I'm not convinced it's the right answer.
Well, just before I come to you, Barry, because you voted against an inquiry, didn't you, yesterday?
No, I voted for the motion, but we can come to that distinction.
Because Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, has broken ranks with the Labour Party. Here's what he had to say.
In my view, the government was right to reject that form of opportunism. But I did hear last night, coming out of that debate, ministers saying they are open to discussing issues now with survivors. And I will add my voice into this and say I do think there is the case for a limited national inquiry that draws on reviews like the one that I commissioned and the one we've seen in Rotherham, the one we've seen in Telford.
All right. So, Barry, I know that you've got views on this. Obviously, I do put it to you that the public perception is that you voted against an inquiry into Pakistani rape gangs.
Well, let's be clear. What I voted for yesterday was to take action to stop children being abused, because that was what was contained in the bill that was before Parliament. What would have happened if the Conservative amendment had been passed is precisely nothing. Nothing would have happened because it simply threw out the bill. It didn't bring in an inquiry, it did nothing of the sort. It simply opposed the measures that were in the bill, measures such as ensuring that there was sharing of information, that children couldn't be taken out of institutions, all the things that the J inquiry, and many people perhaps don't realise, we've already had a national inquiry. It took
Not
7...
specifically into
No, and let's get there.
No.
But we've had a national inquiry. There were recommendations that came out of that, and for 2 years, the previous Conservative government did not implement a single one of those recommendations. So what we were doing yesterday was trying to get on, implement the recommendations, safeguard children. The Conservative amendment would have stopped us from doing it.
Come back to that then, because you were saying, no, that's not true.
Well, I think there are 2 points, Patrick. I think the first is the polling shows us how woefully out of touch most people in Westminster are on this issue. The vast majority of Brits want a national inquiry. They want to deport dual nationals who are convicted of raping children. That is unequivocal. Will Keir Starmer listen? I suspect inevitably he's going to get bounced into committing to an inquiry. The issue I have with Barry and many other Labour MPs when they say, or former MPs so on, they say we've had an inquiry. Everybody who has looked at the J report and the inquiry in 2022 knows it was not exclusively focused on the rape gangs. It only looked at a small handful of areas. It didn't treat this as what it is, which is a national systemic scandal which needs tougher recommendations than what the J report delivered.
Matt, I agree with you. I'm perfectly open to there being an inquiry into that systemic situation, looking at it structurally, looking at what actually went on. And yes, if we can apportion blame and we can cast a light on what went on further, I'm very open.
Just say that though, Barry. Why didn't Keir Starmer just stand up yesterday and say it?
Look. It's been very clear that the government and Jess Phillips has said that they're open to this happening. But the point of, and you know how politics is played, and Miriam will confirm this, what happened yesterday was the Conservatives tried to score what was actually a cheap political point when the real issue was how do we protect children? And that's what the bill that we passed yesterday does. Children are safer today because we passed that bill. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have an inquiry, but children are now safer because we passed that legislation.
Just to bring you in on this, do you think there should be a specific inquiry into Pakistani grooming gangs across the UK?
I think there should be a specific inquiry into all grooming gangs.
Absolutely.
Pakistani grooming gangs comprise a very small amount of the grooming gangs and child sex abuse in this country.
50 towns up and down the country.
Most child sex abuse is sadly by men who are white and within families. That's the sad reality. But we need an investigation into the grooming gangs, absolutely. But what distresses me is that Professor Alexis Jay did a 7-year inquiry, 7 years, and she did look at grooming gangs, among other issues, and she came up with some fantastic recommendations, none of which were acted upon by the Conservative government. The number one issue has got to be that it's a criminal offence for a professional as a teacher or a social worker to fail to identify and report abuse.
Are you not concerned when you see the scale of the problem when it comes to what is specifically going on in the Pakistani communities around the north of England? Are you not think there's a pattern there?
Yeah, I'm absolutely concerned about it, but I want to caveat, we should in no way blanket brand the whole Pakistani community. It's a tiny, unrepresented minority who are condemned by other Pakistani people. And we should focus on the other grooming gangs who are
Well, hang on a minute. They're not condemned loudly by other Pakistani Muslims, though. There's been a deafening silence within Pakistani Muslim communities on this issue. Let's be honest. And what you're doing, Peter, is quite disingenuous because you're adapting the definition of the rape gangs. If you look at organised gang-based child sexual exploitation, Pakistani Muslims are significantly more likely to engage in that practice than any other group. So it's not the case, as you say, that, well actually, we should look at white people rather than Pakistani Muslims.
No, not rather, as well as.
But I think this is such a problem within this particular community. We need a specific inquiry.
Barry,
Matt, yes, shall I take...
The problem we've got here, though, is that, yes, I completely agree, the former inquiry did not cover what it should have covered. It whitewashed some areas, and it was much broader. But many people, including yourself, are saying if only we implemented this recommendation, mandatory reporting of sexual abuse of children. The problem is social workers, police, teachers, others knew that children as young as 12 and 13 were having sex with adult men. They didn't see it as abuse because we now have this culture that as long as you say you consent, that's fine. And unless we change that, unless we actually have an age of consent again, even if we did implement that recommendation, it would be meaningless. Because as long as you say, this child says, I want to have sex, I want to be in this relationship, fine, then it's not abuse. That's the culture we've got to change. That's the point.
I agree. We have to change that culture.
But
there were other recommendations.
Peter, do you? Because I'm glad that we've raised that issue, and I hope you don't mind me asking this. But I'm just going to read you an article in the Telegraph here, which I'm sure you're aware of. Peter Tatchell has argued that, quotes, children have sexual desires at an early age, and has praised, quotes, courage of those selling what he later described as a, quote, pro-paedophilia book.
I did not say that. I did not say that at all. I did not say that at all.
So you deny saying that, do
Yes.
you? And what is your view on the age of consent? And do you think children can have sexual desires at an early age?
The age of consent should be 16 as it is. Young people should be educated and empowered to know the difference between consent and abuse. Yeah. To report. Let me finish.
To make a child think they consent. That's the point of grooming.
Yes, and there should be education about grooming and what it involves. There needs to be education to give young people the skills and confidence to report abuse, because so many young kids
responsible for their own abuse.
No, it isn't making them responsible.
It's illegal. End of story.
Yeah.
If you say to a child, as they teach in schools, let's be honest, as long as it feels right, it's OK, children will continue to be abused. Making a child responsible for identifying when it's abuse, they may not recognise till at 20, 30, 40.
That's why we have
to say it's illegal.
That's why we have to do education about these issues. And child whistleblowers are absolutely essential to put these people behind bars.
You want to get involved?
Miriam, I agree with you. Where you were in Parliament when we passed the Coercive Control Bill, and you know exactly how difficult it is for people who are in a coercive relationship actually to understand even adults, to understand that they're being coerced. So it's absolutely vital that we do have those protections and that we have the education that Peter's talking about. But I wanted to pick up what Matt had said, because Matt, you said there's been a conspiracy of silence.
Deafening silence.
Deafening silence, you said. You're right, but it's been in every community. We don't talk about this enough. We don't say that actually, if you look at the figures, and let's remember they were first published, the breakdown by ethnicity was first published by Labour in November last year, right? If you look at those figures, you find, as Peter pointed out, 76% of those who've been prosecuted have been white. Hang on. Yeah, but what I'm saying is that actually, why are we not talking about the problem that we have as a community?
No, absolutely.
Instead of saying this is a specific problem, it is a specific. It's a crime, crime is happening.
Problem.
Absolutely.
But what you see so often on the Labour side of this debate, and the reason this rape gang scandal is so difficult for people on the left, is because it turns on its head the progressive worldview, which is minorities are good, the majority is bad. And what we've seen over the last few weeks, let's be honest, this wasn't the first time that Labour refused a national inquiry in this vote, Barry. We had that when Oldham said, can we have a national inquiry? Jess Phillips and others said, not right now, sorry, you're going to have to handle it by yourself.
Do you recall...
Can I just finish?
Yeah,
what people out there hear when Labour MPs talk about this is a desperate attempt to shift the focus off a minority community which has been caught out by all of the local independent reports. It was Labour MPs, remember, who said to Anne Cryer in the early 2000s, you're a racist, you're an Islamophobe for talking about it. And it was Labour groups like among others, who said to people...
Well, let me respond. I've let you finish. I've let you finish, so let me respond, OK? You're quite right. The first person, the very first person to call this out was Anne Cryer, who was a Labour MP. OK? So let's not say it was Labour MPs that said don't be racist. It was a Labour MP who was the very first person with incredible courage. She lost her seat as a result, as an MP, because the community turned against her. Right? But she had incredible courage, and she called it out, and she was a Labour MP. So please, indeed, Sarah, who's a wonderful colleague.
I'm going to press pause on this for a second. Is just to bring in the chair of the Women's Policy Centre, Paola Diana, who commissioned this report. Paola, thank you very much. I believe that you've been sitting there listening to this back and forth for quite a while. The poll that you commissioned for YouGov showed that 76% of people did want an inquiry into this issue, and I believe it was 77% of people as well wanted people who committed these crimes to be deported if it was possible. So what's your take on the findings and what you've heard here tonight so far?
Thank you, Patrick, for having me. Our poll shows that Keir Starmer is completely out of touch with the public. It's not the far right who wants a public national inquiry on this incredible scandal. It's the British people. We need to listen to the British people. Keir Starmer should change his stance on that. And these girls were not only groomed. I don't like this polite, language. They were raped. They were tortured. They were filled with crack heroin when they were 11, 12. Some of them were 8 years old, and some of them were killed as well. Can we name this girl? Because we forgot their names. Lucy Lowe, she was burned with all her family. Charlene Downs, she might have become kebab meat for what we know, and the perpetrators, they're still around. They were not convicted because not enough but proof, because there is no body. Victoria Agolya, she was 15 years old when she died from a heroin injection. Becky Watson, she was 13. Vicky Round, she was 20, injected with heroin and cocaine and crack just at the age of 12 for 8 years. And Laura Wilson, she was 17 years old and she was tortured since she was 12. This is an epic scandal. It shows misogyny, systemic misogyny, particularly also within the police forces. What were these policemen finding these naked girls with middle-aged Pakistani men in a room think? Why they didn't arrest these men? Why these men are rotting in jail? So we are furious. As a mother, as an advocate for women's rights, I'm furious. And I tell you, a lot of people out there are furious. This is not just...
Well, Paola, can I just say thank you for coming on and speaking so passionately about it, actually, and thank you for commissioning this polling as well and giving us first look at it here at GB News. Much appreciated, and I do hope to talk to you again very soon. It's Paola Diana there, who is the chair of the Women's Policy Centre. We're going to whiz it on to our next topic that's wrapped up in all of this now, which is Labour Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips. She said that she thought about quitting her job over the apparent abuse that she's received after Elon Musk called her a, quote, rape genocide apologist.
I'll be completely honest with you, Beth. There is those moments where you go, is this the life I asked for? I was a direct service provider before I was an MP, and you think, maybe I'll just go back to doing that. Maybe I'll just go back to running a local women's refuge. I don't need this.
Miriam, without wanting to pigeonhole you, as the only woman on the panel, how do you feel there about listening to Jess Phillips? Because, to be fair, she's not always been that nice about you, has she?
No, she has. I don't know her. I've only spoken to her once. It was a perfectly pleasant conversation, but she decided to name me as a horrible person in an interview with The Times. Very random. But so she certainly knows how to dish it out. But on a human level, I do feel immense empathy with her. I know exactly what it is like to have your name in the headlines, accused of something, to know that everybody's looking at you, to feel unsafe. And unfortunately, that is what goes with politics these days. So I do feel enormous empathy for her on that front. I don't think she's a brilliant safeguarding minister, but I also don't think she's a rape apologist. She's done a lot for domestic violence. And I think she is probably struggling with exactly the same culture clash that Matt's talked about, which is she believes in women's rights, she believes in children's rights, but she's also been caught up with this progressive idea that all cultures are equal, that women don't need protecting, all these kind of things, that men can be women for goodness sake. And she is experiencing that firsthand. But on a human level, I feel sorry for her, and no politician should be targeted in a national and even international way in the way that she has.
She is, Barry, I suspect, a bit of a victim of the things she said in the past, because she's on record on LBC saying that this grooming gang issue is still going on up and down the country. And then when she was there, saying in some of these interviews, Barry, how upset and hurt she was and how at risk she was. And I sympathise with that. She was asked the killer question then, Barry, which is, have you spoken to any of the victims of the Oldham grooming gang? And she said no. And I do wonder if some of this criticism is actually just because she's not doing her job.
Well, look, let's just establish here that we're talking about aggression and violence against women. And yet here one of the most powerful men in the world has used his platform to express his aggressive message against a woman. Somebody who purports to be on the side of women, on girls, to be protecting them, and yet he's abused her in this way, calling her, well, I don't want to repeat it, OK? So there's an irony there, and I'm really grateful to Miriam for the way in which she has, shown sisterly solidarity, if I can put it that way, because I think that's right. And Miriam knows, as I do, because we stood there in Parliament, we sat there year after year, when every year, even when she was a backbencher, it was Jess Phillips that brought to Parliament and read out the names of every woman and girl who had been murdered by a man in the past year. And she does that to this day. She has fought, before she came into Parliament, she was in charge of women's refuges. She has always fought for women and girls. And I think the abuse that she's taken, I really do understand why.
I think, it is also true, though, and I'll be very honest with people, that there is a section of our media class, our political class, who are desperate to make this a story about Jess Phillips rather than what it is a story about, and it's a story about young, white, working-class girls who have been systematically abused by organised Pakistani Muslim gangs. That's the reality of this situation, and the idea that Jess Phillips is a model of good behaviour in public office, the things she said about other politicians, some of whom are here tonight, I think there is a big dose of hypocrisy that is running through.
I think the way Jess can redeem herself, if people have criticism, I think she's done a fantastic job defending women and girls, but is to implement the J report, to make it a crime for professionals not to report child sex abuse or to cover it up, to establish a new child protection authority, to create a central database, which has already been partly done but not fully, to record the ethnicity of the perpetrator and victim and the location, because that would enable us to identify where grooming gangs are operating.
OK. Right, now, we are going to welcome into the fray a lady who's probably been sitting on the line for quite a while, so apologies about that, Christine. But it is the Lib Dem MP and the party spokesperson for Women Inequalities, Christine Jardine. Christine, thank you very much. Welcome back to the show. Great to have you here. Look, I have to start by asking, why did you abstain yesterday on that vote? Because, a lot of people are thinking we should you have not voted for a public inquiry into these rape gang situations. Explain that to me.
What we didn't want to do was to block important child protection measures in the bill, and that is why we didn't support the Conservatives, because we felt that what they were doing was simply a move to distract from the fact that they hadn't enacted Professor Jay's report, which we feel should be enacted, and that the important thing, the immediate thing we have to do is put in place as many protections for young people, for children, for young women as we can, which this bill aims to do. Now, on the subject of an inquiry, we have forward an amendment which will now be heard at committee stage, which does call for the inquiry recommendations to be enacted and for a constant inquiry and updating and looking at the problem in this country and ensuring that the protections are in place and that we are tackling the problems. And we think that has to be done. But the immediate priority was to get this bill through its second stage so that we can make sure protections are in place. And that is why we didn't support it. But we didn't object to the idea of an inquiry or to an inquiry.
OK, I'm going to ask you, look, in your position as Women and Equalities, Christine, and you say that you obviously deeply care about the issue when it comes to grooming gangs. It's a question that stumped Jess Phillips the other day. I'm going to ask it to you. In the last, few days and week or so, since this story's been all over the media, have you personally spoke to any grooming gang victims yourself?
I don't want to put them through the trauma of going through it all again. We should be supporting these women. We should be making sure that we put the protections in place that they can rely on which is another reason why Professor Jay has talked about the importance of enacting her protections so that we do prevent these women having to go through the trauma again.
I get that, but Christine, do you not think they might appreciate a call from the Lib Dem Women and Equalities spokesperson? Christine, do you not think they might appreciate a phone call?
I do think, well, first of all, it's a breach of GDPR for anybody to tell me who they are. That you must be aware of that.
Okay.
That these
some of
women
them are on
need
record,
protect,
Christine.
If they are on record, I am more than happy. I am more than happy for them to contact me, but it would not be right for me to breach their privacy or for me to breach the GDPR by contacting them. If they contact me, of course.
How do you know that what you want to do is what they want then, Christine? Sorry, but I've got to ask you this. How do you know then, if you've not really spoken to any of them, that you're doing what they want you to do?
Because I talk all the time to the groups who are important in my constituency. I have women coming to me in my constituency. I'm not going to reveal who they are. I have women coming to me from my constituency, from other groups. I'm a member of the Women and Equality Select Committee. We listen to the problems. We talk to groups. We are aware of the concerns and of the problems in this country. And I would just like to say it's significant that both Barry and Miriam were defending, they're speaking up for Jess Phillips against, as Barry points out, the irony of one of the world's most powerful, richest men attacking a woman on this issue specifically.
All right. Christine, look, a massive thank you to you, as always, for coming on and for making the time for us here at GB News. Thank you so much. Christine Jardine there, who's Lib Dem MP and party spokesperson for Women.